Hi, this is Mike McCrease, and welcome back once again to Advanced Photoshop. And this time we're going to explore some of the 3D features in Photoshop. There's a lot of things you can do in 3D. We're going to touch on a couple of them or several of them. We're not going to explore all of them because there's just so much you can do. It's really kind of outside the scope of this course, but you can explore a lot of this on your own. Bear in mind that the 3D features in Photoshop are not as robust as you might see in a full-blown 3D application such as Studio 3D Max or Lightwave. But for creating some fairly simple to moderate 3D effects, it's ideal. Plus, you don't have to buy and learn how to use still another software application. Let's start out by creating a new file. File, New. And I'm going to make this just the default Photoshop size, which is going to be 7 inches wide and 5 inches tall. We're going to set the resolution at 72 pixels per inch. And this is just going to be a practice file. With this video, you don't have to turn in anything. It's not actually an assignment. We're just kind of give you an intro to it. So when we get to the assignment phase, you'll have a pretty good idea of how things work before we actually jump into a graded assignment. So just again, a new file. You can click OK. 7 by 5 inches, 72 pixels per inch, and click OK. Okay, so there's my file. And the first thing I'm going to do is set up my workspace. So I'm going to go over here to my panels over here on the right hand side, and I'm going to find my 3D panel, this little cube right here. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to pull that out. And then I'll find my properties panel, this little guy right here. Click on that. I'm going to pull that out, and we're just going to set things up. You want to have these panels open when you're working with 3D, and you can either dock them side by side or one on top of the other, or you can dock them inside the same panel. Which, just to save some space, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the properties panel, and I'm going to click and just drag that right on top of the 3D panel, and when I see that blue border appear around it, I'm just going to let go of my mouse, and then it docks them into the same panel space there, and I can click on 3D and I can click on properties and toggle back and forth. Now again, that's just the way I work, and it works pretty much for this video because obviously I don't have a whole lot of space to show you things here. If you've got a larger monitor, you can place those side by side. I'm just going to go ahead and move these back out of the way here for just a little bit. And we'll come back to those later. Now, one of the things that you can do in 3D in Photoshop is to take text and make it look 3D. And that's what I'm going to do with this little exercise. So I'm going to go to my type tool right over here. Let me pull this out. You can see that just a little bit better. There's my type tool. And then on my options bar at the top, I'm going to choose, you can choose any font you want, but I'm going to choose something that's kind of cool. I'm on a PC here, so I'm going to use this font called Neuropol. Now again, you can choose any font you want, but this one's kind of cool. If you're on a Macintosh, you might try using Siloam, just kind of a nice techie sort of font. And I'm going to set the size to 72 points. I'll have the text centered. And for the color, again, you can choose any color, but choose something that's kind of medium value, not black or white. And I'm going to choose this orange color. The only reason is, well, I like orange, so I'm going to choose that. But again, just avoid white and black because we want to be able to see highlights and shadows as we work on our text, and those obviously wouldn't work for that. So I'm going to click on OK. And I'll move my cursor to the center of my workspace and click, and I'm just going to type in Adobe. Do a little ad for Adobe here. Now, just as a reminder, you can adjust the tracking and kerning of your text. If I select all that text there and hold down my Alt or Option key on the keyboard and then press the left and right arrow keys on the keyboard, I can adjust the tracking and bring those letters closer or farther apart. So just kind of do that to what looks good to you. I don't want the letters too far apart. I don't want them touching. So I'm just going to adjust that. And then I'll go back to my Move tool, make that active. Now let's make certain that our text is perfectly centered. So I'll press Control or Command A to select all. And because I have my selection tool active, once I choose Select All, my Align options appear at the top. So I'm going to choose Align Vertical Centers and Align Horizontal Centers. So my text is perfectly centered. Then I'll deselect. Okay, now I'm going to make this text layer into a 3D object. So I'll go to the top here and find my 3D menu. I'll click on that, and I'm going to choose New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. If these options are unavailable to you, or if you receive an error message, this means that your video card does not meet the minimum standards to run 3D graphics in Photoshop. And if that's the case, you'll have to use a different computer because your video card cannot do the graphics. But most of your computers today, unless you're using something really, really old, should be able to do this. So again, I go to 3D, New 3D Extrusion Layer from Selected Layer, click on that, and then you'll probably get this little message here, this little alert message that says you're about to create a 3D layer. Would you like to switch to the 3D workspace? Now I'm going to choose no because I've already set up my 3D workspace with my properties and 3D panel. Just did that a couple minutes ago. So I'm just going to click on no. And then you see that you've got your text in 3D. You also see that you've got a ground plane, and you'll see that this is a little grid here. You see a blue line. And we're going to touch on that here in just a second. And you should see a little secondary view panel up here in the upper left-hand corner. If you don't, you can go to your view menu and choose Show, and then scroll down to where it says 3D secondary view. You can't see it on this display because it kind of goes off of the viewing area, but 3D secondary view. And I'll just talk about that briefly. This is just the way that we're looking at the object. In this case here, we're looking at it from the top. I can click on this little button that has the video camera icon, and I can choose any of these views for my secondary view. By default, it's at the top, and that's what most people do. In our main view, we're looking at it from the front, but I can take a look at it, see what it looks like from the right, from the back, and from the bottom, and so on and so forth. And you don't really need this, but some people kind of like it. You can resize it if you want to. I think I probably won't be using that today. I can close it by clicking this little X up here, but I think I'll just move it out of the way right now and just kind of shrink it up. Again, that's just something optional. There's a lot of options that you have available to you in the 3D features, and a bunch of them we're not going to explore just as a matter of time. Now, making certain that your Move tool is active, then go next and look in the upper right-hand corner of your view there, and I'm just trying to move this over and show you what I'm talking about. At the upper right-hand corner, you've got several views that are available to you for working in 3D. And here they are. These are my 3D modes right here. And you see that you've got one called Rotate, one called roll, drag, slide, and scale, and it refers to a 3D object. And that 3D object can either be the camera, which is the way I look at it, or it can be the object itself. Let me resize my screen here. We don't have a whole lot of real estate to work with, but we might be able to resize this. Nope, we don't. We just don't have much room to show you everything. So I'm just going to move this out of the way like this so that you can see all your 3D tools. Then I'll pull my toolbar over here so that we can kind of see that. There, I think we can see everything we need to see now. I just want to make certain that you saw all these 3D objects here and your panels. Let me move. I got my other toolbar floating over here so we can see all that. Okay, so I'm going to click on this first option here, the rotate the 3D object tool, making certain that your object itself is not selected. You know, if I do a mouse over, you see this little box appear on it. Don't click, because that's going to select it. So make certain nothing is selected. If you accidentally click on that, bing, you see the object is selected. You see this little widget. If you've done that, just click in a blank area here so that nothing is selected. If nothing's selected, that means that your camera view is active. So I'm going to go over here to this rotate the 3D object. In this case here, since nothing is selected, it's going to rotate the camera. I'm going to click on that, and then I can click and drag inside my view, and you can see that I'm rotating not the object, I'm just rotating my camera view. And now you see that another line becomes visible. You got your blue line here, and you got your red line. The blue line is your z-axis, and this grid line, those are you've got coordinates along these axes. The z-axis controls the space moving towards you or away from you, and the red line is your x-axis. It controls the space to the left or to the right. And we don't see the third axis, but we'll explore that here in a second. And that is your y-axis, and it'll be colored green, and it moves an object up or down. So again, you can just kind of click on this and roll this around and just kind of roll that around and kind of arrange your object as you see fit. Arrange your view, I should say, as you see fit. And then I can press Control or Command plus and zoom in on that a little bit. Now where the blue line and the red line intersect, that is referred to as the point of origin, and the coordinates are 0, 0, 0, 0x, 0y, and 0 z axis. So that's where my object is currently located, is right there at the point of origin. Now if you want to further modify your camera view, again, we're going to make certain that nothing is selected. So right now I've got this text selected, so I'm just going to click away from that so that there's no bounding box around it. That way nothing is selected. Then I can rotate and slide and drag and scale the camera. Now I can click on either of these buttons up here, or I can press Shift and V, and it will toggle through those. And so I can toggle through the roll, and here as I'm rolling the camera view, press Shift V again, and I can kind of slide it around, and so on and so forth. I'll let you kind of experiment with that on your own. Now, as I mentioned, if you want to select an object, you click on it. As I do a mouse over, you see a little bounding box appear around the text. I'm going to click on that, and then you see a little widget there that appears. And that little widget has 3 handles, just like this little widget does. 3 arrows, I should say, with different handles on it. You've got a blue one, which will move or rotate or scale an object on the z-axis. You see this red one over here that will move, scale, or rotate on the x-axis, and the green one will move, scale, or rotate on the green axis. And this is kind of a freehand way of positioning something. For example, if I want to move this object up on the y-axis, I can hover my cursor right over the tip of that arrow, and a little box says Move on Y-axis. And I'll click and drag, and you see that it moves it up or down. And you'll see you've got a little shadow there as well. The shadow, by the way, is the result of a light. If you look over here in the upper right-hand corner, you see this little white ball. That's the light source. We'll touch on that in a little bit. Now, there's other handles on each of these widget arrows. There is one for rotating, and you'll see as soon as I hover over that handle, it says rotate around the z-axis. I can press Control or Command Z to undo that last command. And then there is the third one, which is I can move it on the y-axis. Where am I there? There's move on, there it is, the scale along the y-axis, so I can scale it up or scale it down. But I think those are rather imprecise ways of manipulating an object. But for right now, let's just kind of play with those a little bit, just so you kind of get an idea. And like here, I'm going to move it along the z-axis here a little bit. I'll go to the red arrow, which I think you can see there, move it along the x-axis, and I might rise it up and whatnot. And then once I'm finished playing with it a little bit, I'll go to my 3D menu, and click on that, and choose Snap Object to Ground Plane. And it puts it back down on the ground plane where it was before. Okay, next let's pull out our Properties panel. And the Properties panel takes a little bit of explaining to do. Now again, I've got an object selected here, so it's going to give me the properties for this particular object. Let me do this. I'm going to go to my Move tool here and just going to deselect the object. Nothing is selected. Just click away to deselect. Now in my Properties panel, you see a little video camera icon up here in the upper left-hand corner, which lets me know that this is the properties for the camera, since no object is selected. And I can choose my depth of field here. And if I do something in stereo, we could do that there. We're not going to get into that. Here's my field of view. I can adjust that. So, a variety of options there that we can play with. And then we've got a coordinates button here at the top of the panel. Click on that, and it shows me where on the X, Y, and Z axis that my camera is located and the angle that it is at. Okay, let's go ahead and click on our text object once again to make sure this is selected. And now you see that we have the properties for this particular object. And I want to direct your attention over here to these little buttons here along the top. You've got one for the mesh, which is actually the object itself. Any 3D object is referred to as a mesh object. And then we've got one for deform. It's short for deformation. Those are ways that you can deform the text. We've got another button here for cap, is where you can set the properties for a particular surface on the object. And then we've got the coordinates. Let's click on the coordinates. And you can see that you can position an object along any of our three axes. You can change the rotation and you can change the scale using these fields. You can manually enter data, or you can do a mouse over any of these little values, like the X value right here, and I can click and drag. You see you get the little scrubby indicator, and you can drag that one way or the other, and that kind of gives you some very precise movement. Now what I want to do here is I'm going to set the X value to 0, the Y axis to 0, and the Z axis to 0. That places us right back at the point of origin where we started from. Our angle, if you've rotated your object, set those back to 0 here. And your scale should be at 100%. Well, here at 99.9%. I think that's pretty accurate. So, in other words, we're just back to where we were. What I want to do is move it in a very precise way. Like I say, we experimented with dragging these little handles, but the move, the rotate, and the scale handles are really close together, and it's sometimes hard to select them, much less be precise with them. So I'm going to move my objects simply by coming over here and going to the y-axis, and I'm going to enter 25 in that field, and I'm going to move it up. As soon as I move that up there, or enter that in there, it moves it up 25 units on the y-axis. So my object is now kind of floating above the ground plane. Now let's go to the 3D panel. I'll just click on that right here again, because I've got these guys nested right in the same panel set here. I can just click on 3D. Bing, that brings that up for me here, and I'm going to collapse everything. And I want to direct your attention to these 4 buttons along the top. You've got a button called Environment, or actually, I'm sorry, you've got a button called Filter by Whole Scene. You've got one called Filter by Meshes, Filter by Materials, and Filter by Lights. If I've got it set for Filter by Whole Scene, it's going to show me everything that is in my scene. It's going to show me all the lights, all the objects, and all the surfaces and everything. Now this is really simple here. I've only got one object and one light, so things are fairly simple. But if I were to add multiple objects, multiple lights, and multiple surfaces, then it can be rather complicated. But this shows me everything that's in the scene. It shows my camera view right here. It shows my text object, which is called Adobe, and I can spin that open, and inside that you see that you've got all the different surfaces that make up that 3D text. You've got your front inflation material, which is the front surface of the object. The front bevel material, if we want to put a bevel on it, that would be that little edge right where the front surface meets the top, bottom, or sides. You've got your extrusion material, which is this side part here. We'll experiment with that here in just a little bit. And you've got your back bevel material, back inflation material, and so on and so forth. We don't need to get into that in a lot of detail there. And then you've got your infinite light here, and then your camera. Now again, I don't have to see the whole thing. I can instead come over here and click on Filter by Meshes. I click on that, and all it shows me are my 3D objects. It doesn't show me the lights and all the other stuff, which might clutter up my area. It shows me all the objects. I've only got one object called Adobe, and so there it is. If I click on Filter by Materials, it's going to show me all the different materials that make up this object. And if I choose Filter by Lights, it's going to show me my light. Now again, my light, let me move this panel out of the way here. Here's my light right up here. Yours may or may not be in that same location, depends on your camera angle. But here's my light up here. But when I click on the infinite light in the 3D panel, this little widget shows up. And this is actually my light control. And there's a little handle there. I can click and drag on that handle, and I can change the angle of the light. And you see how the shadow moves in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to choose Filter by Mesh. And then I'm going to go to my Properties panel. And I'm going to click on these 4 buttons at the top, and as I do so, you get different properties that appear. Again, this is for the mesh, this one is for deformation, cap, and coordinates. I can also press V on the computer keyboard, and that's going to scroll through those, so it's just a little shortcut. Save you a fraction of a second of time. Now make certain that your Adobe object is still selected. And let's go to the Deformation tab. When I do that, you get these little widgets that appear, and these are ways to control your deformation. You see this little black box that appears next to each of those handles. That's where I can control the bend angle. I move down, I can control the taper of it, and the extrusion, and so on and so forth. But again, just like moving and rotating an object, these handles are really difficult to deal with, and it's much easier to change the settings in the Properties panel by adjusting these 3 sliders. Here's my extrusion depth. I can adjust that to increase or decrease the amount of extrusion. I can adjust a twist, and I can twist my text and do kinds of weird stuff like that. Notice too that I can also enter data right in these little fields here. I'm just going to put 0 back in there, take it back to its original position, and I can choose to adjust the taper as well. Again, sometimes it's easier to just enter the data in this field. I can also adjust the bend and the shear of an object. Just by adjusting these little sliders at the bottom and choosing whether I want to bend it or whether I want to shear it. Once you're finished experimenting with those, just reset them back to 0. These little widgets, by the way, are referred to as your heads-up display. Some people like to use them, but I'm not a big fan just because I think they're just very hard to control manually. Okay, in the Properties panel, click on the Cap button at the top. And here I want to direct your attention to where it says Sides, Front. There's a drop-down menu. And with these controls, I can choose to adjust the front surface, the back, or the front and back. I'm just going to adjust the front surface, so I'll leave it set to front. And in the lower half of the Properties panel, I'm going to set the inflation angle to 45 degrees. Should be there by default already. And I'll set the strength to 25%. And notice what it has done to the surface. It pulled it out at a 45-degree angle at 25% strength. So now the front surface is kind of bowed out. Now let's click on the Mesh button at the top of the Properties panel. And let's set the extrusion depth to 100. Next, let's change the color of the extrusion material. Let's go back to the 3D panel and click on the Filter by Materials button. And select the extrusion material. Then go to your Properties panel and you see the color. I'm going to change the color. It's the same color as the front of my surface. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. Not real dark, but just a little bit darker. And so now you see that it's darker. Now you see the front surface is kind of ghosted out. That's just because you have got the extrusion material selected. Now let's go back to our 3D panel. And I'll choose Filter by Lights. Click on this little button right here. When I do so, you see that your light widget appears and your object now is back to its normal colors. And you'll see that you've got one light. Now you can create additional lights down here. I'm not going to do that in this little exercise. But once that light is selected there, then go to the properties so that we can explore the properties of this particular light. There are 3 types of light: infinite lights, point lights, and spotlights. Right here it tells you the type of light, and there's a drop-down menu, and I can choose what kind of light it is. Now an infinite light mimics sunlight. It can be rotated, but it can't be moved. And you adjust it by dragging the widget. So I can click on this little widget handle right here, and again I can rotate it, but I can't move it. I can change it to a point light. Now, a point light is like a bank of light, maybe a cookie sheet, if you will, filled with lights. And this light can be moved but not rotated. I'll click on that light, go to my coordinates button, and then I can change the position by changing my coordinates over here in the properties panel. And you can see how the shadow is changing. You probably see that light moving as well. Now let's go back to the light button right here, and you can choose from the drop-down menu, from the type menu, I can choose Spotlight. Spotlights give you the most control because it can be moved and rotated, and it's got a cone of light that can be adjusted. It's a little bit of a trick to use them. Here is my position here. Let's see if we can't bring that down a bit. There we go. I'm bringing my light down. Again, I'm just clicking and dragging on these X, Y, and Z coordinates here. Maybe I'll go to the Z and pull that back a little bit. I can adjust the angle. Then I can click on the Spotlight button at the top, and I can control the cone angle right here so that it covers a broader area. And then I can control the hot spot, which is the light fall off. That's where the light fall off begins. And I can click on this little light fall off option there. So again, it's a little bit trickier to work with, but those are just some options that you've got to play with. Notice too that we have got shadows that we can turn on and off, and you can adjust the softness of the shadow with this slider. Okay, that done. Let's do this. Let's go back to the type here and change it back to infinite, because infinite light's easy light to work with. Let's adjust it so that our shadow is a little bit below our object. And let's set the shadow softness to about 25%. And you see a very grainy looking shadow there. We'll take care of that grain. You'll also notice that your edges of your object are really aliased, have those really sharp jagged edges. We'll take care of that here in just a little bit. Notice too you can change the color of your light and the intensity of it. I'm going to set the intensity to 100%. You can go above that if you like, but if you do, it's going to blow out your highlights. And I'm just going to adjust my my camera angle just a little bit. Just so that my object appears right in the middle of my work area. Yeah, that looks pretty good, I think. Might zoom in just a wee bit here. I can press Control or Command plus to zoom in. And now I'm going to render the image. This is just a kind of a cheesy preview of what my image is going to look like. But once I got everything set up the way I want it to, I've adjusted all my surfaces, adjusted my lighting, adjusted the position of the object, the rotation, blah, 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 blah. Then I go to my Properties panel, and down at the bottom of the Properties panel, you'll see this little box that's got a tiny little cube in it right there. And when you hover over it, a little box pops up that says Render. I'm going to click on that button. And then you see that your ground plane indicator disappears, and this blue grid starts working its way across your image. I'm going to try that one more time. There we go. And you see that your edges of the image are starting to get softer, and so is the shadow. So things are looking much more realistic. This is called ray trace rendering, and it makes things look very realistic. And this little blue grid is going to scan the image multiple times. Every time it scans it, the image is going to be a little bit sharper, a little more well-defined. And this may take a while. Okay, several minutes have passed, and now my object has finished rendering. You see all the aliased edges there have been softened up a little bit, but you see our grid is returned. What I'm going to do next, just to finish this off, I'm just going to go to my Layers panel and just deselect the Adobe object. I'll just kind of click on the background area, background layer, and there's my finished 3D object. Again, you don't have to turn this in. This is just for practice to kind of get you familiar with some of the basic 3D tools, and in particular the 3D panel and the 3D properties panel.